Representative Ortiz-Self, or Lillian. It's so great to have you here today so we could talk a little bit about our experience together. We both came into the legislature basically almost the same time, within days. And it'd be great to hear from you some of the changes that we've both experienced being women of color in the legislature, and so many of our new colleagues are joining us, and the difference. And then you've been the chair of the caucus this year, first year being a remote session. That must have been really difficult. It'd be great to hear a little bit about how that went for you.
Thank you for having me, Mia. It's my pleasure. Yes, we did come in together. I think it was probably just a few days apart. And so it's been exciting to serve with you this whole time. And I remember when we came in that the whole caucus was abuzz because we had, like 3 extra members of color that joined us, right? And so it was like such a big deal that our members of color caucus was up to 8. And we are up to 19 now. So that is one of the biggest changes I've seen in the caucus, is to see the number of members of color grow, because we know that representation matters, of course. And with them come different populations and issues and representation for different communities that we didn't have before here. So that is so very exciting. The other thing that's exciting since we've been here is that when we first came in, we had 28% women. We are now 51% women, and we have the majority. And we've seen the bills that come out, how they change throughout the years when you have women introducing them. Really focused on children and families and strengthening communities. So that's been very exciting. And then, of course, yes, this was my first year as caucus chair. And of course, it's a remote session. And it was just, if you would have told me 2 months before we had session that it would have gone as smoothly and as successful as it did, I wouldn't have believed it, because I was pretty nervous about the whole thing. I think everyone in leadership was, but we had wonderful staff and people that supported it. And I am so proud to be the first Latina in this position. And I am so proud to serve with a vice chair that's a woman of color. And in the Senate, my counterparts are people of color as well. So the first time that all 4 positions are held by someone of color, representing a variety of different communities, and of course, representing the whole state of Washington. So it's a very exciting time.
I remember when we first got elected into these positions, folks thought we were a monolith, that we all had exactly the same issues, we cared about the same things, and we had the same opinions. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we're just not a monolith, and how we're struggling, but also how we're pushing on each other to really learn better about how to serve our communities more deeply and more meaningfully?
Of course, we have a lot of commonality, right? When you are often disenfranchised, or you're not at the table, or don't have a voice at the table, or see our community sometimes struggling with a lot of barriers that have been proposed, or poverty issues, those affect us all, and we can relate to them across the board. But we also have very special needs and different strategies in order to meet those needs for each one of the individual communities in the state of Washington. And what might work for your community may not work for my community. And we need to be very conscientious of that. And as that's something that, as members of color, our caucus, 19 members, we have to keep reminding ourselves that we have to make sure that all our voices are represented, and that all the various communities in the state of Washington are represented.
So Lillian, you passed a bill this year that really makes a big difference, not only for our state, but around the country, in closing the private detention center. Thank you so much for championing that and for passing that to the governor's desk. Do you want to talk a little bit about that bill and the journey it took?
Yes, thank you so much for asking about House Bill 1090. It does ban us entering into contracts with private detention facilities. And it was really important because we kept hearing for years of the abuses that happen in private detention facilities across the across the nation, as well as in our own state. We had hunger strike after hunger strike. We had pleas from loved ones. We had pleas from inmates asking us to help them. And then, as you know, with the pandemic and the coronavirus, things were even more dire. Lack of equipment, lack of supplies, COVID cases increasing. It was just heartbreaking to hear those stories. And we had a wonderful group of advocates that came together to really push for this. It was really a heart-wrenching committee and dialogue around this issue. But the bottom line is this. I just feel like it's immoral to make a profit off of those that are incarcerated, that are in no position, absolutely no position of power. And we're allowing others to make a profit off of that. I also think that even though it's a federal facility, even though it's a private facility, we stood up as the state of Washington to say the basic rights of people will be protected no matter who you are. No matter what business, organization, corporation, facility you run and you try to make a profit off of, you will not do it at the expense of basic rights of Washingtonians. And so that came out loud and clear, and I'm very proud of us for being able to make that statement. It just couldn't have been done without the support of so many in our community and so many voices that risked their own safety to do so.
Closing that detention center makes me feel so good because I have sets of keys at my house from people who are afraid that they weren't going to come home at night to ensure that I could let their children into their house. And I know people who are graduating and who are experiencing life without their parent here because they've been detained and sent back to the country from where they are from, but don't have any connections there anymore. And the time is lost between the loved ones as they're working to do all the paperwork.
My hope is that it will be nationwide. I serve on the board of the National Council of Hispanic State Legislators, and I dropped that as a resolution there as well, that we ask our Congress, that we ask our president to make sure that this is something that they take on and we close them in every state, because unfortunately what was happening here is not unusual. It's happening in every state that has them as well.
Thank you for taking it to the federal level. There are multiple national committees that are super interested in this, so let's keep fighting, Lillian. We've been in the legislature long enough where we typically aren't on the same committees, but just this year we actually did a little bit of a flip-flop. And I had served on the labor committee with Chair Self from the time that I started till just last year. And then now you're the most senior member, I think, on there other than the chair. But the issues that we work on are so close to our hearts, and we're always walking in partnership in these issues, whether it's about protecting janitorial workers or farm workers or making sure that women are getting fair pay. How was it being on the labor committee this year?
It was wonderful because of the important work that the committee addresses every day, just like the issues that you said. But one of the interesting things that I ended up spending a lot of time on, it wasn't my bill, but I ended up taking it over on our side because we didn't have a House companion, was the overtime for farm workers. That is monumental. We have the most progressive bill addressing overtime for farm workers than any state in the nation. And that took a lot of work, but it took a lot of, it had a lot of help from dedicated people on all sides. Together, we can come up with something that moves this forward and starts to acknowledge that the people we depend on the most, that pick our food, deserve overtime, just like everyone else deserves overtime. And so that was a very exciting bill. That's a great example of an exciting bill that committee heard this session and passed. So I was really excited. It was really exciting for me to be part of that.
Well, I remember during one of our first years, you worked on pesticides. And oh boy, wasn't that a hot item. But that really helped me go tour farms and continue to work on food policy. And since then, we've passed breakfast after the bell. And now we're not having food fights on the floor. So it's really great. And I know you are also the champion of the longest acronym, EEOGOAC, I think it is. Thank you for doing that. And probably you want to tell everybody what that means.
It's the Education Opportunity Gap and Accountability Committee. And I have been on that committee for about 10 years, 7 of them as a legislator, really looking at the gaps in our services, the barriers that are present for kids of color, looking at curriculum, looking at a variety of issues around education. So I'm very passionate about all our students being successful in our K-12 system and having paths to move forward on, because we know that that transforms not only their lives, but their families' lives as well.
That's such a great committee, and I know it's public, and everyday folk can join the committee or at least listen in and probably submit questions. If somebody wanted to get involved or learn a little bit more about what your committee is doing, how would they do that?
They can go to the OSPI, the Office of Superintendent Public Instruction's website, and look for the Education Opportunity Gap and Accountability Committee. But it's always held on the third Tuesday of the month. And yes, anybody can listen in on it. And for that matter, they can just call the Office of Superintendent. They can call my office and ask, and my legislative assistant would be glad to give them the information.
Thanks, Lillian. It's been so great to talk with you today. Thank you for carving out a little bit of time in your busy day to have a quick chat.
Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and it was great seeing you.